Good morning, everyone. Brilliant to see an absolutely full hall. More people coming in to discuss all the things we are going to discuss today about the future governance of the world. I'm Bronwen Maddox, I'm Director of Chatham House, and I really look forward to many, many conversations today on the stage, but just as importantly, off it. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming. Thank you, the record number who are joining online. We're very glad to have you, and I look forward to seeing your questions that you ask, and look forward to talking to many of the people who have come from right round the world later in the breaks. This year's conference is called Rewriting the Rules of the World, and it goes to the heart of what we are doing at Chatham House at the moment, which is seeking to answer some of the most pressing questions that are there in international relations today. We are all very aware that we are at a point when the old rules of the world are shifting, even on some days it seems ripped up willfully, or challenged, not enforced, and decaying. And so there is the question of what will come next. And as many, many countries and companies say to us, particularly if they are not the US or China or companies representing those, they say, look, we need rules. And if the huge powers are not going to observe them or are going to set their own rules, then nonetheless, we, smaller countries, companies operating across borders, we need some kind of rules. They might be regional, they might be new alliances, but we need something in order to trade, in order to have a sense of security, in order to deal with the pressing problems of the world, whether it is critical minerals, the many environmental challenges, the health challenges, those of new technology. We need something. And so the thrust of what we are doing at Chatham House, particularly in our thematic work, is to pursue that question of what comes next and who is going to shape it. Is it indeed, more positively, a chance for many countries who feel they were not round the table when the last rules were written? Is it a chance for them to have more voice, more representation in existing institutions, perhaps those of the UN, more representation and architecture of the ones that may come up now? My colleagues are busy all the time, convening, debating, and engaging in our own independent research. There is no Chatham House single voice, I should say, and one of the deep pleasures of being at Chatham House is the plurality of voices that you get and that we very deliberately encourage. But we do push through to recommendations, to solutions, because we are in times that need that. Not just description of problems, but answers, and sometimes very urgent answers. I'd like to thank you for your support in every way. That is ideas, that is in presence, that is in suggestion, that is often in financial support. We are a charity, we have no endowment. We rely on the generosity of our supporters right round the world to maintain our independence, which is the heart of our reputation, and to keep our work going. If you're inspired today and want to support our work, please do get in touch. Before we dive into the conference and the opening session, I want to thank those who have made today possible, as well as our wider work. Thank you to our strategic partners, Akbank, Novartis, Vodafone, and one of the things I really treasure about those relationships is the very stimulating conversations I have with the executives there about the dilemmas that they face in the world and how they resolve them. Thank you to our Insights partner, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University. They're sponsoring the session in particular on democracy, and we had just a fabulous conversation yesterday in Chatham House about that. Thank you to Diageo, who are kindly hosting our drinks reception at the end of the day. And I also want to thank the St. Pancras Hotel for allowing us to use this extraordinary building and the hospitality they show us every year. And I want to thank the Chatham House staff, many of them, who have worked very hard to pull this together in very fast-moving times with a fast-moving agenda. And I'm really delighted at how it has come together. Little bit of housekeeping. Unless otherwise noted by the chair, plenary sessions are on the record, they're not under the Chatham House rule, and videos of the sessions will be available after the event on our website. Please do share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag #CHLondon. And with that, I'm going to introduce the first panel, which is in fact moderated by me, and it is with Lord Robertson, the Right Honourable Lord Robertson, George Robertson, who has been many, many things, including as a long association with Chatham House, but is most recently and prominently the lead reviewer of the UK government's 2025 Strategic Defence Review. He was the 10th Secretary General of NATO from 1999 to 2003 and UK Secretary of Defence from 1997 to 1999. And if I read out all the other things he's done or is doing, that would be the whole session. So I'm going to stop there and welcome to the stage George Robertson. Lord Robertson, thank you very much. And this is an in-conversation, and that is what it is going to be. And we are obviously going to touch on NATO and the meeting imminent within days, and we're going to touch on the Strategic Defence Review. But it would be remiss of me not to start with the news that is on all our phones and devices right now and on the television screens, which is what is happening between Israel and Iran. And I wondered if you could give us your assessment of the situation.
Well, I don't know any more than most of the people in this room do about what is going to happen. A lot of it will depend on the President of the United States when he wakens up in the morning.
If he's asleep.
Yeah, and a lot hinges on that, but a lot hinges as well on what happens in Tehran and in Tel Aviv, and I think in Riyadh, Beijing, and in the Kremlin as well, because the chessboard has got a lot of different players. In Tehran, they want to protect the regime. That has always been their absolute priority.
And by the regime, you mean the Supreme Leader? You mean the Revolutionary Guards? There isn't, we become increasingly conscious, there isn't one Iran.
I know, but the Islamic Republic has got a personality, and I think they want to protect that. They're under attack at the moment. They've soaked up a lot of violence so far because I think that's their way of keeping America out of the battle and out of the Gulf, which I think they want in the long term to dominate anyway. America and the MAGA community, Donald Trump's supporters, are bitterly divided, at war with each other at the present moment in order to get the presidents here. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu has got a very clear objective in terms of the adversary that he sees on his doorstep, but doesn't seem to have a strategic plan as to what eventual outcome it will be. And then you've got the Kremlin, who are yet again an unreliable ally. Beijing, which gets 70-80% of its oil from Iran, and who must be watching with great concern of what's happening. Got Saudi Arabia, which is a player as well. So all of these bits are on the chessboard, and nobody knows really what's going to happen. One feature will be the president's decision as to whether or not
the U.S. president's decision.
The U.S. president's decision, and we await to see what that's going to be, and that will shift the places on the chessboard quite dramatically, irrespective of the way it goes. That it would appear at the moment that he's involved in a deadly game of brinkmanship, using the same skills that he had as a property developer. But this is not, the plan for a condominium in the center of New York. This is the future stability of the world. But we can only wait to see now what decision he comes to.
Is it, in your view, a credible military goal to get rid of Iran's nuclear weapons program using military force?
Well, there might be, and I think that the Israelis clearly have that plan. But then
the plan to push the US into using more military force to get rid of it.
I think they politically have tried to do that, and maybe in some ways they boxed President Trump into that. But then it's not an automatic guarantee that it will be successful. You know, the Iranians have planned and plotted and organized for the possibility that this might happen, and therefore they have located the planning and the capability that they seek to gain as far away from even the buster bombs that might well be deployed.
May I ask you one final thing about it? Whether you think Israel has boxed President Trump in, has bounced him, if you like, into this. This is a president who has said, I'm proud of no new wars in my first term. I have no intention. He's surrounded by others. His vice president, J.D. Vance, really disliking the idea of American involvement in foreign wars, and yet we seem to be in a position where Israel, if it is going to complete this objective, needs American help.
I think all his instincts are against getting involved in a foreign war, and especially a Middle Eastern war. He knows instinctively that if he puts his toe in the water, then the piranha fish grabs hold of the toe, so there's no easy...
Sorry, who is the piranha, Netanyahu or the Supreme Leader?
Well, it's the endless, long war, rather than any particular individual. I wouldn't call them, piranhas, but you're trapped into a cycle then that you have desperately tried to avoid. And if you look at his recent trip to the Middle East, didn't include a visit to Israel, so that the ostensible loyalty that he bears to Israel wasn't sufficient for him even to pay a very brief visit to Netanyahu during that period. So, he's going to be equivocal, and we have to be ready for equivocation right up until the last second.
Let's swing round to NATO and the NATO summit, which is upon us within days. What counts as a successful summit?
A communique of any kind, I think, would be a success. Getting
world leaders staying to the end of the meeting, maybe.
Who knows? I only had 19 countries to deal with. Mark Rutte has 32 countries to deal with, and 32 egos, 32 governments, 32 public opinions. This is a real management problem. Up to now, he's done remarkably well, and I think he'll want to get out of it a degree of unity, especially on key things like Ukraine. That's going to be one of his important objectives. Then getting a consensus around what should be spent.
And he has made the meeting comparatively short, very much focused on the budget.
Yes, but at the end of the day, it's not just about the budget, it's about capabilities. I made that clear when I was there. Maybe I paid, at that time, too much attention to percentages of GNP, which tell you very little about what countries can do. There are at least 5 big countries in NATO who have not met the 2% objective, which was laid down in the Wales summit 11 years ago. And yet we're now talking about 3.5 plus 1.5, 5% of GNP on defence. In countries who are finding it a struggle at the moment to even get to the 2%. So I think the accent has got to be on readiness, it has to be on equipment, it has to be on delivering to secure what he believes is necessary for the defence of the alliance and the alliance countries.
I just want to come back to that point you just mentioned, which I think is fascinating, of there now being 32 members that Rutte has to deal with. That is a very different task, as you said, from what you were dealing with. It is a political job then, trying to hold NATO together and get some kind of unity, as you said, with a communique out of it.
Herding cats, was what we used to say. It was involved, and that is a huge difficulty. But even in the 19 that I had, France at that time was not in the integrated military command. It had sort of come in, but was only half in, and was creating problems. President Chirac was always there to sort of disturb the achievement of consensus at any particular point. So the alliance has evolved since then. The concept of absolute consensus on absolutely every subject has now been moderated so that there are elements within NATO that don't require consensus, and activities that can take place, like Libya, took place without American involvement, but using NATO assets to do that. So there is a variation inside the system that has evolved over time. And that's the great strength of NATO. Its great weakness is the fact that it's made up of all these democracies. But the great strength is that it evolves over time in order to deal with the problems that it faces.
So what would unity on Ukraine look like? What do you think is achievable at this point?
I think a long-term commitment to Ukraine's territorial integrity, to making sure that Vladimir Putin does not prevail. In the short term, obviously, there's prospects of ceasefires, which would imply a degree of negotiation over territory. But I think the primary responsibility for the North Atlantic Council, as it is in leaders' context, is going to be that Vladimir Putin doesn't succeed. Because if he succeeds in Ukraine, then everything else, all of the rules-based system that you talked about in your introduction, is thrown into doubt.
So I completely agree with that, and so do many of my colleagues at Chatham House, about the significance of this particular conflict, of not being seen to allow seizing of territory by force to be, rewarded or tolerated and so on. But this brings us inevitably to the US. And I don't want everything to be dominated by Donald Trump. He brings his own particular characteristics to this, but some of these forces, like the US, demanding that Europe pay more, an argument that he's now won, but that goes back a long way. But on this, you now have a US president who says Ukraine started it, for one, and by the by, I fancy having Canada. What does that do to NATO?
Well, I think it complicates things for NATO. To put it very mildly, but he changes his mind, and one day he's saying that Ukraine started it, and the next day he says he's angry with Vladimir Putin. That's the nature of the individual that has been elected by the American people, and you have to deal with that. I had to deal with individual egos round the table in my time. And that sometimes created problems. The French were not easy soulmates in the consensus round the table, but you have to work on it. And Mark Rutte, has got long experience of handling a complicated coalition in the Netherlands, so he's got that skill, and up to now he's been able to do it. So managing Donald Trump will be the biggest job that he's got. But there are other egos around the table as well, and other people who can complicate the achievement of consensus as well.
And Mark Rutte spoke at Chatham House very recently and displayed, in my view, world-class diplomacy on this question of how to handle the US at the moment, which is part of the reason he was appointed with precisely that in the sights. But is it not a particular problem for NATO to have one member of NATO, the US, saying it would like to take over another member of NATO, Canada, even if that one is unwilling, which it profusely says it is?
Yeah, I think, again, we've got to separate out the rhetoric from the reality. And he moves on very quickly in these different positions. I was in Canada a couple of weeks ago, and Canadian identity has now been reinforced, to an extent that it has not been up to now by being talked about being the 51st state. So I think, that in a funny way, he may well have galvanized people. I think that he's reminded people about what the value of Article 5 actually is, the value of NATO. And every American administration that comes in starts off with doubts. You know, I had the end of the Clinton administration, which had doubts about European defense. If you remember Madeleine Albright about duplications and with NATO structures. Then we had the Bush administration, and you had Donald Rumsfeld who said NATO is all about war by committee. But eventually they begin to realize that the imbalance inside NATO means that America has got a greater degree of influence. 31 automatic allies sitting round the table with you every week, at least once a week, dealing with every security issue. That's a huge bonus. Nobody else in the world has got that. The $400 or $500 billion a year spent by the non-US allies magnifies what America spends on defense and magnifies American influence in the world as a whole. And the 50,000 American troops who are based in Europe are actually the front line of the defense of continental United States of America. So, you know, for a president who believes in bargains and who believes in the ability to do a real bargain, it's a huge bargain for the United States of America.
This is a great sales pitch for the value of NATO, which I find very plausible. Do you think Article 5 is still credible?
I believe it is. If you ask people today in the street now, you know, would you go to the defense of Estonia? If they took a couple of fields in eastern Estonia, you know, would we go to war? You know, a lot of people would have doubts, but not when it comes to the crunch. On the 12th of September 2001, when we put the Article 5 to the North Atlantic Council, you know, we knew that there were apprehensions and there were worries and there were difficulties, and I thought that people did object to the wording and the rest of it. But at the end of the day, you know, they believed that that was the right thing to do, and the following day everyone thought it was their idea. So fine, I'm quite happy to, you know, abandon any ego for that, because you know, it is important. And when it comes to the crunch, it's what matters, and it's what ties people in to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. And the other thing is, in our defense review, and I mean, you sort of preempt your questions, we're talking about Article 3. Most people know about Article 5. They don't know how cleverly it was put together, and they only discovered that on the 12th of September 2001. But Article 3 actually says...
And that was the one time that Article 5 has been invoked after 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah. In America's defense, a point that doesn't always register there, but yes. Sorry, I interrupted you on Article 3.
But Article 3 lays an obligation on countries to look after their own defense as part of the collective defense of the alliance. And for the United Kingdom, that was pretty academic. When I did my last review, you know, we've got a moat around our country. We're a long way away from trouble. And therefore, homeland defense and homeland resilience wasn't a priority. It sure as anything is now. And you know, that's one of the central pillars of the review.
I can feel the Defence Review tugging at this conversation, so I'm getting there in a second, and then to audience questions, so do get them ready. But perhaps I can just ask you what you think NATO members, particularly European ones, ought to be aiming at in Ukraine.
Well, we must be helping the Ukrainians with what they need at the moment. The G7 met in Banff the other day, and Vladimir Putin used that opportunity to launch one of the biggest attacks on the capital city of Ukraine, as if to remind these people who were you know, gathering in Banff that he was still there and he still wanted to take over the Ukrainian nation and to subordinate it into some greater sense. So he
has been absolutely consistent on that. So what can Europeans particularly realistically aim to do in supporting Ukraine?
Increase the help that is giving. We've got to listen to what President Zelensky says and what his military commanders need at the present moment, and we must step that up. It is hugely important for our own defense that we maintain it. You know, I see the defense of the country as being an insurance policy, like household insurance. Paying the premium is an important thing, and people have got to be willing to pay the premium for that insurance. And part of that insurance policy is making sure that Ukraine prevails and that Putin is defeated. That is very much part of our insurance policy for our safety at this time.
So let's come round to the review and the UK's own insurance policy. You made 62 recommendations. At the end of that, the government has said it's going to implement those. Which of those recommendations is most important in your view? What is the change that this review represents?
Well, I've been asked this question, and I don't think it's a fair question, because the 62 recommendations add up to one of the most fundamental changes and transformations.
Okay, but that is what I'm asking you, not to pick out number 24 or something. But
no, but the proposals on an integrated force, alongside the defence reform proposals, that is absolutely crucial. NATO first. And making us absolutely compatible with what NATO is demanding at the moment, as well as the reforms to our acquisition programme, making sure that our forces get the equipment when they need it, and the taxpayers get good value for it, I think is crucially important in terms of the reform process that is there. But we have recommendations about people, about logistics, about ammunition supply, about the National Armaments Director who will perform that link between the military and the defence industry, which is too weak at the moment, which needs very much to be strengthened. So a whole series of recommendations, most of them with timelines.
And you put a lot of emphasis on the timelines of that, particularly procurement.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a bit about what you are trying to change there?
Well, we have to pick up the lessons of Ukraine for a start. The ingenuity of the Ukrainians at the present moment really is quite breathtaking, what they did inside Russia with the drone attack on the strategic bomber fleet. But how they have adapted. At the moment, in the British Ministry of Defence, for orders over £20 million, from the idea being launched to the contract being established, is 6 years. In modern day Ukraine, it's about 6 minutes before they have to make the adaptation. So, the speed with which we pick up the inventiveness that is out there in small companies, medium companies, who see the Ministry of Defence as a brick wall. So we have 2 organisations proposed in the review that will both pick up the initiative, and the other one that will develop them in practice.
So this is much, much faster than in the past. British Defence, it's not alone in this, but it has a terrible record of overspending, of stuff being very late. It's driven the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament nuts for decades. What is the change you think must come about now? Well,
the creation of a new National Armaments Director, who's going to have much more executive authority and be one of the primus inter pares at the top of the organisation, will produce a link with industry. Maybe sharing intelligence, sharing thought processes, in order that you get the drumbeat of orders, which the industry at the moment has not been able to rely on. So you get to the point where countries might be saying, we'd like more C-17, the big transport aircraft, and Boeing says, sorry, we've closed down the line. The demand dried up. And that applies right through to ordinary ammunition as well.
Is there enough money behind it?
Well, that's the question that everybody asks. But we did that review based on an envelope of 2.5% of GNP. We didn't have it at the beginning. It was 2.3%, but we were told 2.5%, and the Chancellor agreed to 3% from the beginning of the next Parliament, and that allowed us to make the
in the next Parliament, I think, not the beginning. It hasn't been that precise.
Next Parliament, yeah. But we'll see. The next few weeks might determine that. But that was a struggle to get even that in the present circumstances. But the Prime Minister and the Defence Secretary have made it absolutely clear in Parliament, in words, that the Defence Review will be implemented. The 62 recommendations that we make will be implemented without any particular caveat, and that is an important component of what we were doing. It's Britain's national insurance policy, and I think we have to face the fact that the Prime Minister definitely faces that fact. We are not safe. The British people are not safe. There are sub-threshold threats to us, to our undersea cables, to our undersea pipelines, to our critical national infrastructure. The grey zone is already attacking us from our adversaries outside, and we're vulnerable to that. And we now know what the above the threshold threat is, because it's visible and real and horrible in eastern Ukraine. So we now know what a future war would be like, and it would not be nice. So we are not safe, and therefore the insurance policy is what we spend on defence. And the country has got to be willing to pay its premium on the insurance of the country, just as it is unwilling to do without household insurance.
And yet there is so much packed into that phrase, has got to. I mean, if you were parachuted back into the cabinet now, how would you and your colleague go about the task of telling people in Britain, you're not safe? We're sitting here on this beautiful day. People of they're aware of the moat around the country, as you said, though it doesn't stop the small boats, which people are very concerned about, but they broadly feel safe. How do you persuade them, perhaps, to take money out of welfare or benefits or health or pensions and put it into defence when the immediate threat seems a long way away the other side of the European continent?
Yeah, and to people in the streets of Bucha and Mariupol in Ukraine, they were worried about, the cost of living and education for their kids and, housing, and then the next day they were invaded by a hostile force, and they're now living under a brutal occupation. I'd also point to what happened in Spain and Portugal just a few weeks ago when the lights went out. Paralysing two modern European countries very, very quickly indeed. I'd point at Heathrow Airport, where a couple of transformers blow up, and nobody knows why, either in Spain or Portugal, or in that case, which paralysed one of the busiest airports in Europe. And that can happen at any time. What do we do now?
And there's no immediate suggestion this was a grey zone attack, as you say. It sounds like things. We don't know,
and you don't know, and we
no,
don't.
No, I don't know.
And but I think if you put yourself in the minds of our adversaries, is that not an easier way in which you can reduce the democracies to a shivering jelly? Certainly in Spain and Portugal, it paralysed the country quite dramatically and quite quickly as well.
We might expand on that political point, but it does hang there as how you, on the one hand, as Keir Starmer wants to do, encourage the country to start growing and have more confidence and indeed be more upbeat, and on the other hand, raise this spectre of it being a shivering jelly.
Yeah, but if you invest in defence, you create jobs and you create growth as well. That's one of the brutal realities, and sometimes you have to prepare for war in order to guarantee the peace. But they're the two sides of the coin, that you can create growth by investing in the insurance policy that keeps your country safe.
Let's go to a few questions. We've got some minutes now. Who wants to start? One in the front. I'm going to take three. And if you could say who you are, the microphone's coming to you.
Jaroslava Barbieri, Ukraine Forum, Chatham House. Thank you for your reflections today. Could you please elaborate a bit more on your views on the impact of the current escalation between Israel and Iran on the war in Ukraine? Because there's this complex mosaic of dynamics happening. We've seen earlier this month Trump diverting 20,000 anti-drone missiles, that were meant for Ukraine to the Middle East. We've seen, of course, we know that Iran has been supplying drones to Russia, and Putin is trying now to position himself as a potential mediator. So what are your views on sort of the impact of Iran, Israel on the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Really interesting, thank you. One here in the middle.
Thank you. Graham Stewart, Member of Parliament for Beverley and Holderness, temporary security minister in the Foreign Office under the last government. You suggested that strategy, the Israeli strategy specifically around Iran, was insufficiently strategic. I wonder if you could expand on that as they face a regime which has as a foundational principle the destruction of Israel and has never seen that threat weaker than it is today.
Let me take just those two together because they're on Israel, Iran. George.
Well, you know, I could spend hours going into all of the issues that are concerned with what's happening in the Middle East at the present moment. But what it does is remind us very clearly of the volatility of the world today, and therefore the necessity for making sure that we are protected, that we have the institutions and the deterrent effect to make sure that our people are safe in a world where these things are happening. You know, that is the major lesson that I would take out. The volatility of events combined with the velocity of change, the developments that are taking place in terms of missiles and the rest of it, suggests that, you know, we are now vulnerable in a way that we weren't before, and therefore that has a domestic effect on us as well. But it's concerning because the world is a very small place. We are all interconnected, and therefore if people are acting irrationally and violently in one part of the world, it doesn't remain there. It used to be, if a CNN camera was not in a battle space, it didn't exist. You know, the first battle between Armenia and Azerbaijan in Nagorno-Karabakh had no television cameras there at all, and we didn't notice that it actually happened. The Budapest Memorandum, which saw Ukraine giving up its status as the third nuclear power in the world, was almost completely ignored in the world, and it was a memorandum and not a treaty, and turned out to be utterly worthless. So we are reminded now by what is going on every day with television pictures, which makes it real and important and has knock-on effects on everything that we do, including in domestically. In terms of Israel's view about Iran, yes, there is one specific objective it has, to stop this country, which has got its raison d'etre, the elimination of the State of Israel. So I suppose in one way you could say the strategy is to eliminate that threat. On the other hand, can that be done simply by military means? Is that the only way that it can be done? Is there an outcome that they can describe in some detail? Would the successor regime to the Islamic Republic regime be better or less threatening to Israel? So in that respect, I think, you know, you can see what their tactical objective is, but not necessarily what the long-term strategic outcome is that they predict.
Just one tiny detail on that first question. If Iran is weakened, does it lose the ability to supply Russia with drones, and does that matter?
I think so, but it's interesting that Russia appears yet again to be an unreliable ally, as it was in Syria as a whole. I think it will hinder their ability to help Russia, but that doesn't seem to have motivated Russia to get involved at the present moment.
The world has a lot of drones in it at the moment. Let's go here. I'm going to squeak in two more here, and then there's one over there.
Hello, Bryce Wakefield. I'm the CEO of the Australian Institute of International Affairs. Great to be here. I want to pick up on your comments about Russia as an unreliable ally. As listening to your comments, I don't think I heard anything about China, which is, of course, our serious security concern in our region. I'm wondering, when I go around Europe, I hear a lot about China and Russia being one theatre and how we must all band together to fight the common threat. I'm wondering if your analysis on Russia as an unreliable ally to Iran also applies to China.
Thank you. And the one over here, sort of in the middle. we get a microphone quickly? We've got a countdown.
Hi, I'm Tristan Langley from King's College London. So my question was about the UK Defence Review. So you talked about a recommendation to the government saying NATO first and like having the compatibility of the British Army with NATO. What about the European partners and the EU SAFE program that's been voted this week or last week, if I remember well? Do you see the UK being involved as a partner with the EU in a common defence program?
Thank you.
Yeah, China, if you read the report and in detail, you will see that, we talk about Russia being the immediate threat because it's there and it's live and what it's doing today. But in the longer term, clearly China represents a major challenge for all of us. And they are developing in a way that we didn't see before. When I did the review in 1998, China was in the shadows completely. It didn't matter, and we all thought globalization was a great idea. Now China is developing both economically and strategically, and is spreading its tentacles throughout the world. So in any long-term conflict, we are likely to be up against Chinese technology because it's being spread, and we make that clear in the analysis of the current context as well. And the AUKUS program is a very visible way in which we are tying ourselves into the Asia Pacific in a way that that we haven't done in a military sense. But that is our contribution to the area as well. In terms of Europe, of course, we're part of Europe geographically. Brexit changed the politics; it didn't change the geography. And the recent moves that have been made, both on the EU side as well as on the UK side, make sense of how we deal with the challenges that we all face in the future. So the EU is taking defence much more seriously than it ever did before. There's a commissioner for defence. It has funds that have been established there as well. There will be a lot of manoeuvring around, a lot of opportunistic moves on a national basis, no doubt. But at the end of the day, people have begun to realise that if we don't act together, then our adversaries will exploit the divisions between us. So I see much more in terms of the cooperation. But I really should say, I'm not here as a government minister, a retired politician. We did the review. A lot of what comes out of the review and the defence investment plan that will follow the review is not the review itself. The review is there as an analysis both of the threat and the problems and the difficulties, but also the solutions as well. We're not just frightening the British people, as indeed they should be frightened, but we are giving them the way in which we believe the country can be safer.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the frankness that indeed comes often with being a former politician or someone in government at the moment. There are several quite detailed questions about Iran online, and I haven't taken these because we have managed to get in an extra session, me in conversation with Sir John Sawers, who used to run MI6 but spent many years of his life on the negotiation of the Iran deal, and I feel I put in a lot of time following that as well at the time. That is later this afternoon if you look up at your updated digital calendar. With that, I'm going to thank George Robertson, and we're going to hand over to the next session, which is on the US and China, chaired by Chatham House's chair, Simon Fraser. Lord Robertson.
Thank you.